But Coalition Provisional Authority boss Paul Bremer had a different blueprint for the Pentagon's new Iraq. Every official with links to the old regime was to go. It was called de-Baathification, but it was indiscriminate. So, along with Saddam's stooges and placemen, Bremer cleared out most of the people needed to run the health system.
We had no typewriters, no desk, no nothing anymore. But we had left one kind of asset, which was the people who were there to run the health system. They were still there. And so then to fire those very people is obviously doesn't make sense, because you can replace them, but you lose time in replacing them and training them.
Dr. Ali Fadil was working in Baghdad Medical City at the time. He saw firsthand the effects of de-Baathification.
We lost a very, very, very intelligent and professional doctor because of a silly and idiot policy of getting rid of the Ba'athist at the very, very beginning, which was, totally wrong. He's just a doctor, he's just a physician. And he would, at least if he was there, and if he's still there, he would save a lot of lives.
To head the reconstruction of the Iraqi health service, the Pentagon appointed a health administrator from Michigan, James Haverman.
I went to Iraq as a senior advisor. My role is to advise Ambassador Bremer on healthcare issues, but also to work with the Ministry of Health to make sure that it's strong.
Haverman had little international health experience, but he was a prominent Bush supporter.
He was appropriate as a political advisor because he had the trust of senior leadership in the Pentagon who related to the reconstruction of Iraq. He had the political qualifications but not the technical ones. And he was a highly moral religious individual, and he fit with the profile of many of the people who were in senior administration.
I happen to vote Republican. I happen to support George W. Bush as president and his policies. And I did some consulting once for Jeb Bush during a transition from one term to another. That all looks like pretty good credentials to me. And that's just who I am.
There were lots of people with much more experience of developing health internationally, with dealing with post-conflict situations. You hadn't had any experience in that.
I didn't deal with post-conflict situations. What's unique about a post-conflict situation? What's unique about a pre-conflict situation? What's unique about managing healthcare in Michigan? I think you got to have the skill and the ability. I happen to be a social worker by training. I happen to understand health. I managed a healthcare system for Michigan for 10 million people. I don't even know why I'm trying to defend this, because I think I got the ability to do it. And I think the president and people who interviewed me at the Pentagon and the State Department and elsewhere thought I had the skills as well.
Critics claim that people were given important jobs not because they were the best qualified, but because of their political connections.
I believe it had a lot to do with showing that the U.S. was in control, and I believe that it had to do with rewarding people that were politically loyal. So rather than being a technical agenda, I believe it was largely a politically motivated reward and punishment kind of agenda.
That sounds very like the way Saddam ran the country.
If you were to interview Iraqis today about what they see day to day, I think they will tell you that they don't see a lot of difference.
Back on the road, Ali is continuing his investigation of the failures in rebuilding Iraq's essential services. He's trying to find out why so many children are suffering from diarrhea and dehydration.
A member of the city council took me on a tour to neighborhoods where there are no schools, no domestic water supplies, and sewage in the street. The U.S. Ambassador for Reconstruction says Diwania has benefited from a $500 million reconstruction program, but I can see little evidence of it.
يعني ولا واحد ينفذ أوامرنا، وهل تشوف العالم هاي بالصيف أبد ما ننام، وهسه حاليا هذا شتاء يعني لو طب وشوف البيوت البق هيك صاير بالغرف، الله شاهد، والريحة يعني أبد ما لا سولفها.
I was told that a US company was paid nearly $3 million to rebuild Diwaniyah's sewage works. Yet the plant is still not working because power cables have not been laid. So sewage goes into the river untreated, polluting drinking water downstream.
The United States says it spent billions on Iraq's essential services. Yet according to its own latest figures, they're worse than before the war. They're generating less electricity, yet $1.5 billion has been spent on it. They're producing less oil, yet $500 million has been spent on that too. They're supplying less clean water, yet another $500 million has been spent.
Back in the hospital, an anxious father fears his child may have meningitis. As so often in the desperate situation of Diwaniyah, angry parents turn on the doctors.
أريد مستشفى، ابني يتمرض، أجيب المستشفى تعبانة، هي تجيب له مرضها كبيرة، مو أنا وياك، إحنا طبقة واحدة حبيبي، سيد إحنا ولد ولاية وطبقة واحدة، أنا أحكي عاد كبير يعني هذا قاعد ورا الكرسي وهاي الملايين والنفط والبترول ولا هم عليه من طبوا سواد عيوننا يخلصونا من صدام على مود النفط. زين هو النفط تاليها هم تفرهد، لا جاب لنا فت حاجه جديده ونقول رحم الله والديك.
يا هاي المفروض تتولاها الرؤساء الكبار. هاي الرؤساء الكبار هي تلغف.
But at least I was able to tell the family that their child did not have meningitis. She had a complication arising from fever and dehydration, probably caused by bad sanitation.
The money that should have helped those people was entrusted to the coalition by the United Nations. But official auditors have not been able to discover where it all went. Now, investigations by the Special Inspector General for Iraqi Reconstruction are leading to arrests. But the inspectors have struggled to get at the truth about the Coalition Provisional Authority and the Development Fund for Iraq.
There were less than adequate internal controls in many cases. Very often we found that contracts were missing, that the individuals who were responsible for them had short terms and they had left and turned it over to someone else. And so we had a very difficult time actually trying to make sure that all the money was accounted for.
It was a climate which practically invited exploitation. The largest single recipient of Iraq's money was American energy company Halliburton, formerly led by US Vice President Dick Cheney. They received $1.6 billion of Iraqi money to help reinstate the country's oil supply. Auditors said $177 million were overcharged. Although Halliburton continues to deny this, it recently reached a settlement with the US government to repay $9 million. But while some companies may have overcharged, others went far further. Scott Custer and former Republican candidate Mike Battles were about to fleece Iraqi funds of millions of dollars. One man who worked with them until he realized what they were up to was Bob Isaacson.
Their background was impeccable. They were military officers, CIA. One of them had run for the United States Congress. They were recommended by very high-level U.S. government officials as being honest individuals.
Today, lawyer Alan Grayson is working with Bob Isaacson to recover money from Custer Battles, using a U.S. law which allows Isaacson to share some of it.
These were people who went over to Iraq without any presence there, without any employees there, without equipment, without facilities, without any tangible qualifications, and without any money.
They had no money. Scott Custer, from what I'm told by my men, could not pay the $15 or the $20 to get out of the Jordanian airport, the immigration fee.
Almost immediately, Custer Battles landed a $15 million contract to provide security for civilian flights at Baghdad airport. But the flights never happened, so Custer Battles carried out other security duties. Frank Willis didn't hire them, but as the coalition's head of civil aviation, he did have to pay them.
$2 million was due on the 1st of August. We went down to the vault, got the $2 million in crisp new $100 bills. They were shrink-wrapped in $100,000 amounts. We called the representative of Custer Battles and said, come on up and get your payment, bring a gunny sack. We've got your money ready for you.
Meanwhile, from their base in Baghdad Airport, Custer and Battles were determined to expand their empire. And their next big chance was this: Iraq's money exchange program, known as the ICE Project. It was a classic coalition exercise. They couldn't get desperately needed drugs to hospitals, but they would cheerfully devote enormous resources to replacing dinars showing Saddam's face with ones that didn't.
The logistical challenge involved with this currency exchange is enormous. The amount of cash is something like over 2,200 tons of bills. It's an enormous challenge. It is something that we believe is another sign that the reconstruction is on track.
Custer Battles won a contract which would pay them their costs plus 25%. But they wanted far more than that, as one of their associates explained to Bob Isaacson.
He said that, oh no, we can make dramatically more money than that. I said, well, what are you talking, how could you possibly do that?
The associate explained that they would simply create false companies to put in exaggerated bills for costs, which would be passed on to the Americans.
I said, listen, I'm not going to do that. That's illegal. We're not going to be involved. We don't get involved in that kind of stuff. We ain't going to be involved. And it's criminal.
Custer Battles went ahead anyway.
They simply made up invoices from the companies that they controlled for numbers that were wildly different from what their actual expenses were. And they handed in those invoices in lieu of the real invoices.
For a new helipad, Custer Battles got another company to do the work, then charged a profit of more than 60% on top. And they rented to the coalition forklift trucks that were not even theirs.
That were Iraqi Airways property that had been abandoned. They painted them over so that no one would recognize them as Iraqi Airways forklifts, and Custer Battles then turned around and leased them to the government for $108,000 over 4 months alone.
But then Custer Battles made an extraordinary mistake. They left a devastatingly incriminating document in a CPA meeting room. Grayson has a copy.
So this is what he left behind. It's the spreadsheet as of August 20th of 2003. It lists various columns. This is what Custer Battles actually spent. This is what they invoiced to the government for the same items. 5-ton truck. Actual cost, $240,000 for 12 of them. Invoiced cost, $600,000. Filing cabinets. Actual cost, $0. Evidently because they found them abandoned at Baghdad International Airport. Invoiced cost, $200. Hand trucks, 12 of them. Actual cost, $480. Invoiced cost, $4,800. That's a 1,000% markup. And on and on and on for page after page after page, until you reach the end and you see that $3 million of expenses under a time and materials contract turned into a horrific $10 million in billings to the government.
But perhaps the most extraordinary thing is this. Despite the evidence, the US government has taken no legal action to recover the money.
And yet they continued this contract. They allowed Custer Battles to keep working and to receive other contracts. They took no action to prevent that for almost a year.
What they